Sir Anthony Charles Lynton Blair is a British politician who served as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1997 to 2007 and leader of the Labour Party from 1994 to 2007. On his resignation he was appointed Special Envoy of the Quartet on the Middle East, a diplomatic post which he held until 2015. He has been the executive chairman of the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change since 2016. As Prime Minister, many of his policies, referred to as Blairism, reflected the Third Way political philosophy. He is one of only two Labour leaders to form three majority governments, the other being Harold Wilson. Blair was born in Edinburgh. After attending the independent school Fettes College, he studied law at St John's College, Oxford, and became a barrister. He became involved in Labour politics and was elected Member of Parliament for Sedgefield in 1983. He supported moving the party to the political centre of British politics in an attempt to help it win power. He was appointed to the party's front bench in 1988 and became Shadow Home Secretary in 1992. He became leader of the opposition on his election as Labour Party leader in 1994, following the sudden death of his predecessor, John Smith. Under Blair, the party used the phrase New Labour to distance itself from previous Labour politics and the traditional idea of socialism. Despite opposition from Labour's left wing, he abolished Clause 4, the party's formal commitment to the nationalisation of the economy, weakened trade union influence in the party, and committed to the free market and the European Union. In 1997, the Labour Party won its largest landslide general election victory in its history. Blair became the country's youngest leader since 1812 and remains the party's longest-serving occupant of the office. Labour won two more general elections under his leadership in 2001, in which it won another landslide victory, and in 2005, with a substantially reduced majority. He resigned as Prime Minister and Labour Party leader in 2007 and was succeeded by Gordon Brown, who had been his Chancellor of the Exchequer since 1997. The fraught relationship between Blair and Brown has been the subject of much controversy and speculation since 1994. Blair's governments enacted constitutional reforms, removing most hereditary peers from the House of Lords, while also establishing the UK's Supreme Court and reforming the office of Lord Chancellor. His government held referendums in which Scottish and Welsh electorates voted in favour of devolved administration, paving the way for the establishment of the Scottish Parliament and Welsh Assembly in 1999. He was also involved in negotiating the Good Friday Agreement. His time in office occurred during a period of continued economic growth, but this became increasingly dependent on mounting debt. In 1997, his government gave the Bank of England powers to set interest rates autonomously, and he later oversaw a large increase in public spending, especially in healthcare and education. Blair championed multiculturalism and, between 1997 and 2007, immigration rose considerably, especially after his government welcomed immigration from the new EU member states in 2004. This provided a cheap and flexible labour supply but also fueled Euroscepticism, especially among some of his party's core voters. His other social policies were generally progressive. He introduced the National Minimum Wage Act 1998, the Human Rights Act 1998, and the Freedom of Information Act 2000, and the Civil Partnership Act 2004. He declared himself tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime, and oversaw increasing incarceration rates and new anti-social behavior legislation, despite contradictory evidence about the change in crime rates. He was in office when the 7/7 bombings took place and introduced a range of anti-terror legislation. Blair oversaw British interventions in Kosovo and Sierra Leone, which were generally perceived as successful. He also supported the foreign policy of the George W. Bush administration by ensuring that the British armed forces participated in the war in Afghanistan from 2001, and more controversially the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Blair argued that the Saddam Hussein regime possessed an active weapons of mass destruction program, but no stockpiles of WMDs or an active WMD program were ever found in Iraq. The Iraq War became increasingly unpopular among the British public, and he was criticized by opponents and the Iraq Inquiry for waging an unjustified and unnecessary invasion. His domestic popularity sharply declined, and amid large-scale dissent within the Labour Party, in 2006 he announced his intention to resign within a year. Blair had notable electoral successes and reforms, though his legacy remains controversial largely due to the Iraq War and his relationship with George W. Bush. He has also received criticism for his relationship with the media, centralization of executive powers, and aspects of his social and economic policies. Early years. Blair was born at Queen Mary Maternity Home in Edinburgh, Scotland, on May 6, 1953. He was the second son of Leo and Hazel Blair. Leo Blair was the illegitimate son of two entertainers and was adopted as a baby by Glasgow shipyard worker James Blair and his wife, Mary. Hazel Corscaden was the daughter of George Corscaden, a butcher and orangeman who moved to Glasgow in 1916. In 1923, he returned to Ballyshannon, County Donegal, in Ulster. In Ballyshannon, Corscaden's wife, Sarah Margaret, gave birth above the family's grocery shop to Blair's mother, Hazel. Blair has an older brother, Sir William Blair, a High Court judge, and a younger sister, Sarah. Blair's first home was with his family at Paisley Terrace in the Willowbrae area of Edinburgh. During this period, his father worked as a junior tax inspector whilst also studying for a law degree from the University of Edinburgh. Blair's first relocation was when he was 19 months old. At the end of 1954, Blair's parents and their two sons moved from Paisley Terrace to Adelaide, South Australia. His father lectured in law at the University of Adelaide. It was when in Australia that Blair's sister Sarah was born. The Blairs lived in the suburb of Dulwich close to the university. The family returned to the United Kingdom in the summer of 1958. They lived for a time with Hazel's mother and stepfather at their home in Steps on the outskirts of northeast Glasgow. Blair's father accepted a job as a lecturer at Durham University, and thus moved the family to Durham, England. Aged 5, this marked the beginning of a long association Blair was to have with Durham. Since his childhood, Blair has been a fan of Newcastle United Football Club. Education and legal career. With his parents basing their family in Durham, Blair attended the Chorister School from 1961 to 1966. Aged 13, he was sent to spend his school term time boarding at Fettes College in Edinburgh from 1966 to 1971. Blair is reported to have hated his time at Fettes. His teachers were unimpressed with him. His biographer, John Rentowell, reported that all the teachers I spoke to when researching the book said he was a complete pain in the backside and they were very glad to see the back of him. Blair reportedly modeled himself on Mick Jagger, lead singer of the Rolling Stones. During his time there he met Charlie Falconer, whom he later appointed Lord Chancellor. Leaving Fettes College at the age of 18, Blair next spent a gap year in London attempting to find fame as a rock music promoter. In 1972, at the age of 19, Blair matriculated at St John's College, Oxford, reading jurisprudence for 3 years. As a student, he played guitar and sang in a rock band called Ugly Rumours, and performed some stand-up comedy, including parodying James T. Kirk as a character named Captain Kink. He was influenced by fellow student and Anglican priest Peter Thomson, who awakened his religious faith and left-wing politics. While at Oxford, Blair has stated that he was briefly a Trotskyist, after reading the first volume of Isaac Deutscher's biography of Leon Trotsky, which was like a light going on. He graduated from Oxford at the age of 22 in 1975 with a second-class honours BA in jurisprudence. In 1975, while Blair was at Oxford, his mother Hazel died aged 52 of thyroid cancer, which greatly affected him. After Oxford, Blair then became a member of Lincoln's Inn and was called to the bar and became a pupil barrister. He met his future wife, Cherie Booth, at the chambers founded by Derry Irvine, 11 King's Bench Walk Chambers. Early political career. Blair joined the Labour Party shortly after graduating from Oxford in 1975. In the early 1980s, he was involved in Labour politics in Hackney South and Shoreditch, where he aligned himself with the soft left of the party. He put himself forward as a candidate for the Hackney Council elections of 1982 in Queensbridge Ward, a safe Labour area, but was not selected. In 1982, Blair was selected as the Labour Party candidate for the safe Conservative seat of Beaconsfield, where there was a forthcoming by-election. Although Blair lost the Beaconsfield by-election and Labour's share of the vote fell by 10 percentage points, he acquired a profile within the party. Despite his defeat, William Russell, political correspondent for the Glasgow Herald, described Blair as a very good candidate, while acknowledging that the result was a disaster for the Labour Party. In contrast to his later centrism, Blair made it clear in a letter he wrote to Labour leader Michael Foot in July 1982 that he had come to socialism through Marxism and considered himself on the left. Like Tony Benn, Blair believed that the Labour right was bankrupt. Socialism ultimately must appeal to the better minds of the people. You cannot do that if you are tainted overmuch with a pragmatic period in power. Yet, he saw the hard left as no better, saying, "There is an arrogance and self-righteousness about many of the groups on the far left which is deeply unattractive to the ordinary would-be member. There's too much mixing only with people whom they agree." With the general election due, Blair had not been selected as a candidate anywhere. He was invited to stand again in Beaconsfield, and was initially inclined to agree but was advised by his head of chambers Derry Irvine to find somewhere else which might be winnable. The situation was complicated by the fact that Labour was fighting a legal action against planned boundary changes, and had selected candidates on the basis of previous boundaries. When the legal challenge failed, the party had to rerun all selections on the new boundaries. Most were based on existing seats, but unusually in County Durham a new Sedgefield constituency had been created out of Labour voting areas which had no obvious predecessor seat. The selection for Sedgefield did not begin until after the 1983 general election was called. Blair's initial inquiries discovered that the left was trying to arrange the selection for Leigh Huckfield, sitting MP for Nuneaton, who was trying elsewhere. Several sitting MPs displaced by boundary changes were also interested in it. When he discovered the Trimedon branch had not yet made a nomination, Blair visited them and won the support of the branch secretary John Burton, and with Burton's help was nominated by the branch. At the last minute, he was added to the short list and won the selection over Huckfield. It was the last candidate's election made by Labour before the election, and was made after the Labour Party had issued biographies of all its candidates. John Burton became Blair's election agent and one of his most trusted and longest-standing allies. Blair's election literature in the 1983 general election endorsed left-wing policies that Labour advocated in the early 1980s. He called for Britain to leave the EEC as early as the 1970s, though he had told his selection conference that he personally favoured continuing membership and voted yes in the 1975 referendum on the subject. He opposed the exchange rate mechanism in 1986 but supported the ERM by 1989. He was a member of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, despite never strongly being in favour of unilateral nuclear disarmament. Blair was helped on the campaign trail by soap opera actress Pat Phoenix, his father-in-law's girlfriend. At the age of 30, he was elected as MP for Sedgefield in 1983, despite the party's landslide defeat at the general election. In his maiden speech in the House of Commons on July 6, 1983, Blair stated, "I am a socialist not through reading a textbook that has caught my intellectual fancy, nor through unthinking tradition, but because I believe that, at its best, socialism corresponds most closely to an existence that is both rational and moral. It stands for cooperation, not confrontation, for fellowship, not fear. It stands for equality." Once elected, Blair's political ascent was rapid. He received his first front-bench appointment in 1984 as Assistant Treasury Spokesman. In May 1985, he appeared on BBC's Question Time, arguing that the Conservative government's public order white paper was a threat to civil liberties. Blair demanded an inquiry into the Bank of England's decision to rescue the collapsed Johnson Matthey Bank in October 1985. By this time, Blair was aligned with the reforming tendencies in the party and was promoted after the 1987 election to the Shadow Trade and Industry team as spokesman on the City of London. Leadership roles. In 1987, he stood for election to the Shadow Cabinet, receiving 71 votes. When Kinnock resigned after a fourth consecutive Conservative victory in the 1992 general election, Blair became Shadow Home Secretary under John Smith. The Old Guard argued that trends showed they were regaining strength under Smith's strong leadership. Meanwhile, the breakaway SDP faction had merged with the Liberal Party. The resulting Liberal Democrats seemed to pose a major threat to the Labour base. Blair, the leader of the modernising faction, had an entirely different vision, arguing that the long-term trends had to be reversed. The Labour Party was too locked into a base that was shrinking, since it was based on the working class, on trade unions, and on residents of subsidised council housing. The rapidly growing middle class was largely ignored, especially the more ambitious working-class families. They aspired to middle-class status but accepted the Conservative argument that Labour was holding ambitious people back with its levelling down policies. They increasingly saw Labour in terms defined by the opposition, regarding higher taxes and higher interest rates. The steps towards what would become New Labour were procedural but essential. Calling on the slogan "One Member, One Vote," John Smith secured an end to the trade union bloc vote for Westminster candidates' election at the 1993 conference. But Blair and the modernisers wanted Smith to go further still, and called for radical adjustment of party goals by repealing Clause 4, the historic commitment to nationalisation of industry. This would be achieved in 1995. Leader of the opposition. John Smith died suddenly in 1994 of a heart attack. Blair defeated John Prescott and Margaret Beckett in the subsequent leadership election and became leader of the opposition. As is customary for the holder of that office, Blair was appointed a Privy Councillor. During his speech at the 1994 Labour Party conference, Blair announced a forthcoming proposal to update the party's objects and objectives, which was widely interpreted to relate to replacing Clause 4 of the party's constitution with a new statement of aims and values. This involved the deletion of the party's stated commitment to the common ownership of the means of production and exchange, which was generally understood to mean wholesale nationalization of major industries. At a special conference in April 1995, the clause was replaced by a statement that the party is democratic socialist, and Blair also claimed to be a democratic socialist himself in the same year. However, the move away from nationalisation in the old Clause 4 made many on the left wing of the Labour Party feel that Labour was moving away from traditional socialist principles of nationalisation set out in 1918, and was seen by them as part of a shift of the party towards New Labour. He inherited the Labour leadership at a time when the party was ascendant over the Conservatives in the opinion polls, since the Conservative government's reputation in monetary policy was left in tatters. by the Black Wednesday economic disaster of September 1992. Blair's election as leader saw Labour support surge higher still in spite of the continuing economic recovery and fall in unemployment that the Conservative government had overseen since the end of the 1990-92 recession. At the 1996 Labour Party conference, Blair stated that his three top priorities on coming to office were education, education, and education. Aided by the unpopularity of John Major's Conservative government, New Labour won a landslide victory at the 1997 general election, ending 18 years of Conservative Party rule, with the heaviest Conservative defeat since 1906. According to diaries released by Paddy Ashdown, during Smith's leadership of the Labour Party, there were discussions with Ashdown about forming a coalition government if the next general election resulted in a hung parliament. Ashdown also claimed that Blair was a supporter of proportional representation. In addition to Ashdown, Liberal Democrat MPs Menzies Campbell and Alan Bath were earmarked for places in the cabinet if a Labour-Lib Dem coalition was formed. Blair was forced to back down on these proposals because John Prescott and Gordon Brown opposed the PR system, and many members of the shadow cabinet were worried about concessions being made towards the Lib Dems. In the event, virtually every opinion poll since late 1992 put Labour ahead with enough support to form an overall majority. Prime Minister Blair became the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom on May 2, 1997. Aged 43, Blair became the youngest person to become Prime Minister since Lord Liverpool became Prime Minister aged 42 in 1812. And until Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister in 2022. He was also the first Prime Minister born after World War II and the accession of Elizabeth II to the throne. With victories in 1997, 2001, and 2005, Blair was the Labour Party's longest-serving Prime Minister, and the first and only person to date to lead the party to 3 consecutive general election victories. Northern Ireland. His contribution towards assisting the Northern Ireland peace process by helping to negotiate the Good Friday Agreement was widely recognised. Following the Omagh bombing on August 15, 1998, by members of the Real IRA opposed to the peace process, which killed 29 people and wounded hundreds, Blair visited the County Tyrone town and met with victims at Royal Victoria Hospital, Belfast. Military intervention and the War on Terror. In his first 6 years in office, Blair ordered British troops into combat 5 times, more than any other Prime Minister in British history. This included Iraq in both 1998 and 2003, Kosovo, Sierra Leone and Afghanistan. The Kosovo War, which Blair had advocated on moral grounds, was initially a failure when it relied solely on air strikes. The threat of a ground offensive convinced Serbia's Slobodan Milosevic to withdraw. Blair had been a major advocate for a ground offensive, which Bill Clinton was reluctant to do, and ordered that 50,000 soldiers, most of the available British Army, should be made ready for action. The following year, the limited Operation Palliser in Sierra Leone swiftly swung the tide against the rebel forces. Before deployment, the United Nations mission in Sierra Leone had been on the verge of collapse. Palliser had been intended as an evacuation mission, but Brigadier David Richards was able to convince Blair to allow him to expand the role. At the time, Richards' action was not known and Blair was assumed to be behind it. Blair ordered Operation Barras, a highly successful SAS/parachute regiment strike to rescue hostages from a Sierra Leone rebel group. Journalist Andrew Marr has argued that the success of ground attacks, real and threatened, over air strikes alone was influential on how Blair planned the Iraq War, and that the success of the first 3 wars Blair fought played to his sense of himself as a moral war leader. When asked in 2010 if the success of Palliser may have emboldened British politicians to think of military action as a policy option, General Sir David Richards admitted there might be something in that. From the start of the War on Terror in 2001, Blair strongly supported the foreign policy of George W. Bush, participating in the 2001 invasion of Afghanistan and 2003 invasion of Iraq. The invasion of Iraq was particularly controversial, as it attracted widespread public opposition and 139 of Blair's own MPs opposed it. As a result, he faced criticism over the policy itself and the circumstances of the decision. Alastair Campbell described Blair's statement that the intelligence on WMDs was beyond doubt as his assessment of the assessment that was given to him. In 2009, Blair stated that he would have supported removing Saddam Hussein from power even in the face of proof that he had no such weapons. Playwright Harold Pinter and former Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad accused Blair of war crimes. Testifying before the Iraq inquiry on January 29, 2010, Blair said Saddam was a monster and I believe he threatened not just the region but the world. Blair said that British and American attitude towards Saddam Hussein had changed dramatically after the September 11 attacks. Blair denied that he would have supported the invasion of Iraq even if he had thought Saddam had no weapons of mass destruction. He said he believed the world was safer as a result of the invasion. He said there was no real difference between wanting regime change and wanting Iraq to disarm. Regime change was U.S. policy because Iraq was in breach of its UN obligations. In an October 2015 CNN interview with Fareed Zakaria, Blair apologized for his mistakes over Iraq war and admitted there were elements of truth to the view that the invasion helped promote the rise of ISIS. The Shilkut Inquiry report of 2016 gave a damning assessment of Blair's role in the Iraq war, though the former Prime Minister again refused to apologize for his decision to back the US-led invasion. Relationship with Parliament. One of Blair's first acts as Prime Minister was to replace the then twice-weekly 15-minute sessions of Prime Minister's questions held on Tuesdays and Thursdays with a single 30-minute session on Wednesdays. In addition to PMQs, Blair held monthly press conferences at which he fielded questions from journalists and from 2002 broke precedent by agreeing to give evidence twice yearly before the most senior Commons Select Committee, the Liaison Committee. Blair was sometimes perceived as paying insufficient attention both to the views of his own cabinet colleagues and to those of the House of Commons. His style was sometimes criticized as not that of a prime minister and head of government, which he was, but of a president and head of state, which he was not. Blair was accused of excessive reliance on spin. He was the first UK Prime Minister to have been formally questioned by police, though not under caution, while still in office. Events before resignation. As the casualties of the Iraq War mounted, Blair was accused of misleading Parliament, and his popularity dropped dramatically. Labour's overall majority at the 2005 general election was reduced from 167 to 66 seats. As a combined result of the Blair-Brown Pact, Iraq War, and low approval ratings, pressure built up within the Labour Party for Blair to resign. Over the summer of 2006, many MPs, including usually supportive MPs, criticized Blair for not calling for a ceasefire in the 2006 Israel-Lebanon conflict. On September 7, 2006, Blair publicly stated he would step down as party leader by the time of the Trades Union Congress conference held 10-13 September 2007, having promised to serve a full term during the previous general election campaign. On May 10, 2007, during a speech at the Trimden Labour Club, Blair announced his intention to resign as both Labour Party leader and Prime Minister. This triggered the 2007 Labour Party leadership election, in which Brown was the only candidate for leader. At a special party conference in Manchester on June 24, 2007, Blair formally handed over the leadership of the Labour Party to Gordon Brown, who had been Chancellor of the Exchequer in Blair's three ministries. Blair tendered his resignation on June 27, 2007, and Brown assumed office during the same afternoon. Blair resigned from his Sedgefield seat in the House of Commons in the traditional form of accepting the stewardship of the Chiltern Hundreds, to which he was appointed by Gordon Brown in one of the latter's last acts as Chancellor of the Exchequer. The resulting Sedgefield by-election was won by Labour's candidate, Phil Wilson. Blair decided not to issue a list of resignation honours, making him the first Prime Minister of the modern era not to do so. Policies. Social reforms. In 2001, Blair said, "We are a left-of-centre party, pursuing economic prosperity and social justice as partners and not as opposites." Blair rarely applies such labels to himself, but he promised before the 1997 election that New Labour would govern from the radical centre, and according to one lifelong Labour Party member, has always described himself as a social democrat. However, in a 2007 opinion piece in The Guardian, left-wing commentator Neil Lawson described Blair as to the right of centre. A YouGov opinion poll in 2005 found that a small majority of British voters, including many New Labour supporters, placed Blair on the right of the political spectrum. The Financial Times on the other hand has argued that Blair is not conservative, but instead a populist. Critics and admirers tend to agree that Blair's electoral success was based on his ability to occupy the centre ground and appeal to voters across the political spectrum, to the extent that he has been fundamentally at odds with traditional Labour Party values. Some left-wing critics, such as Mike Marcuse in 2001, argued that Blair oversaw the final stage of a long-term shift of the Labour Party to the right. There is some evidence that Blair's long-term dominance of the centre forced his Conservative opponents to shift a long distance to the left to challenge his hegemony there. Leading Conservatives of the post-New Labour era hold Blair in high regard. George Osborne describes him as the master. Michael Gove thought he had an entitlement to Conservative respect in February 2003, while David Cameron reportedly maintained Blair as an informal advisor. Blair increased police powers by adding to the number of arrestable offences, compulsory DNA recording and the use of dispersal orders. Under Blair's government the amount of new legislation increased, which attracted criticism. He also introduced tough anti-terrorism and identity card legislation. Economic policies. During his time as Prime Minister, Blair raised taxes, introduced a national minimum wage and some new employment rights, introduced significant constitutional reforms, promoted new rights for gay people in the Civil Partnership Act 2004, and signed treaties integrating Britain more closely with the EU. He introduced substantial market-based reforms in the education and health sectors, introduced student tuition fees and sought to reduce certain categories of welfare payments. He did not reverse the privatization of the railways enacted by his predecessor John Major and instead strengthened regulation and limited fare rises to inflation plus 1%. Blair and Brown raised spending on the NHS and other public services, increasing spending from 39.9% of GDP to 48.1% in 2010-11. They pledged in 2001 to bring NHS spending to the levels of other European countries, and doubled spending in real terms to over £100 billion in England alone. Immigration. Non-European immigration rose significantly during the period from 1997, not least because of the government's abolition of the primary purpose rule in June 1997. This change made it easier for UK residents to bring foreign spouses into the country. The former government advisor Andrew Neither in the Evening Standard stated that the deliberate policy of ministers from late 2000 until early 2008 was to open up the UK to mass migration. Neither later stated that his words had been twisted, saying, "The main goal was to allow in more migrant workers at a point when, hard as it is to imagine now, the booming economy was running up against skills shortages." Somehow this has become distorted by excitable right-wing newspaper columnists into being a plot to make Britain multicultural. There was no plot. Environmental record. Blair criticized other governments for not doing enough to solve global climate change. In a 1997 visit to the United States, he made a comment on great industrialist nations that failed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Again in 2003, Blair went before the United States Congress and said that climate change cannot be ignored, insisting we need to go beyond even Kyoto. Blair and his party promised a 20% reduction in carbon dioxide. The Labour Party also claimed that by 2010 10% of the energy would come from renewable resources, however, it only reached 7% by that point. In 2000, Blair flagged up €100 million for green policies and urged environmentalists and businesses to work together. Foreign policy. Blair built his foreign policy on basic principles and added a new activist philosophy of interventionism. In 2001, Britain joined the US in the global war on terror. Blair forged friendships with several European leaders, including Silvio Berlusconi of Italy, Angela Merkel of Germany and later Nicolas Sarkozy of France. Along with enjoying a close relationship with Bill Clinton, Blair formed a strong political alliance with George W. Bush, particularly in the area of foreign policy. For his part, Bush lauded Blair and the UK. In his post-9/11 speech, for example, he stated that America has no truer friend than Great Britain. The alliance between Bush and Blair seriously damaged Blair's standing in the eyes of Britons angry at American influence. A 2002 poll revealed that a large amount of Britons viewed Blair as a lapdog of Bush. Blair argued it was in Britain's interest to protect and strengthen the bond with the United States regardless of who is in the White House. However, a perception of one-sided compromising personal and political closeness led to discussion of the term poodleism in the UK media, to describe the special relationship of the UK government and Prime Minister with the US White House and President. A revealing conversation between Bush and Blair, with the former addressing the latter as Yo. Blair was recorded when they did not know a microphone was live at the G8 summit in St. Petersburg in 2006. Middle East policy. Syria and Libya. Zimbabwe. Russia. Relationship with media. Rupert Murdoch. Blair was reported by The Guardian in 2006 to have been supported politically by Rupert Murdoch, the founder of the News Corporation organization. In 2011, Blair became godfather to one of Rupert Murdoch's children with Wendy Deng, but he and Murdoch later ended their friendship. In 2014, after Murdoch suspected him of having an affair with Deng while they were still married, according to The Economist magazine. Contacts with UK media proprietors. A Cabinet Office Freedom of Information response, released the day after Blair handed over power to Gordon Brown, documents Blair having various official phone calls and meetings with Rupert Murdoch of News Corporation and Richard Desmond of Northern and Shell Media. The response includes contacts clearly of an official nature in the specified period, but excludes contacts not clearly of an official nature. No details were given of the subjects discussed. In the period between September 2002 and April 2005, Blair and Murdoch are documented speaking 6 times, 3 times in the 9 days before the Iraq War, including the eve of March 20 US and UK invasion, and on January 29, April 25 and October 3, 2004. Between January 2003 and February 2004, Blair had 3 meetings with Richard Desmond, on January 29 and September 3, 2003 and February 23, 2004. The information was disclosed after a 3+1 2-year battle by the Liberal Democrats' Lord Avebury. Lord Avebury's initial October 2003 information request was dismissed by then Leader of the Lords, Baroness Amos. A following complaint was rejected, with Downing Street claiming the information compromised free and frank discussions, while Cabinet Office claimed releasing the timing of the PM's contacts with individuals is undesirable. as it might lead to the content of the discussions being disclosed. While awaiting a following appeal from Lord Avebury, the Cabinet Office announced that it would release the information. Lord Avebury said, "The public can now scrutinise the timing of his contacts with the former Prime Minister, to see whether they can be linked to events in the outside world." Blair appeared before the Leveson inquiry on Monday, May 28, 2012. During his appearance, a protester, later named as David Lally-Wackelin, got into the courtroom and claimed he was guilty of war crimes before being dragged out. Media portrayal. Blair has been noted as a charismatic, articulate speaker with an informal style. Film and theatre director Richard Eyre opined that Blair had a very considerable skill as a performer. A few months after becoming Prime Minister, Blair gave a tribute to Diana, Princess of Wales, on the morning of her death in August 1997, in which he famously described her as the People's Princess. After taking office in 1997, Blair gave particular prominence to his press secretary, who became known as the Prime Minister's official spokesman. Blair's first PMOS was Alastair Campbell, who served in that role from May 1997 to June 8, 2001, after which he served as the Prime Minister's Director of Communications and Strategy until his resignation on August 29, 2003 in the aftermath of the Hutton inquiry. Blair had close relationships with the Clinton family. The strong partnership with Bill Clinton was made into the film The Special Relationship in 2010. Relationship with Labour Party. Blair's apparent refusal to set a date for his departure was criticised by the British press and members of Parliament. It has been reported that a number of cabinet ministers believed that Blair's timely departure from office would be required to be able to win a fourth election. Some ministers viewed Blair's announcement of policy initiatives in September 2006 as an attempt to draw attention away from these issues. Gordon Brown. After the death of John Smith in 1994, Blair and his close colleague Gordon Brown were both seen as possible candidates for the party leadership. They agreed not to stand against each other, it is said, as part of a supposed Blair-Brown pact. Brown, who considered himself the senior of the two, understood that Blair would give way to him. Opinion polls soon indicated, however, that Blair appeared to enjoy greater support among voters. Their relationship in power became so turbulent that the Deputy Prime Minister, John Prescott, often had to act as marriage guidance counselor. During the 2010 election campaign, Blair publicly endorsed Gordon Brown's leadership, praising the way he had handled the financial crisis. Post-premiership. Diplomacy. On June 27, 2007, Blair officially resigned as Prime Minister after 10 years in office, and he was officially confirmed as Middle East envoy for the United Nations, European Union, United States, and Russia. Blair originally indicated that he would retain his parliamentary seat after his resignation as Prime Minister came into effect. However, on being confirmed for the Middle East role, he resigned from the Commons by taking up an office of profit. President George W. Bush had preliminary talks with Blair to ask him to take up the envoy role. White House sources stated that both Israel and the Palestinians had signed up to the proposal. In May 2008, Blair announced a new plan for peace and for Palestinian rights, based heavily on the ideas of the Peace Valley Plan. Blair resigned as envoy in May 2015. Private sector. In January 2008, it was confirmed that Blair would be joining investment bank J.P. Morgan Chase in a senior advisory capacity and that he would advise Zurich Financial Services on climate change. His salary for this work is unknown, although it has been claimed it may be in excess of £500,000 per year. Blair also gives lectures, earning up to $250,000 for a 90-minute speech, and in 2008 he was said to be the highest paid speaker in the world. Blair taught a course on issues of faith and globalization at the Yale University Schools of Management and Divinity as a Howland Distinguished Fellow during the 2008-09 academic year. In July 2009, this accomplishment was followed by the launching of the Faith and Globalization Initiative with Yale University in the US, Durham University in the UK, and the National University of Singapore in Asia, to deliver a postgraduate program in partnership with the foundation. Blair's links with, and receipt of an undisclosed sum from, UI Energy Corporation, have also been subject to media comment in the UK. In July 2010 it was reported that his personal security guards claimed £250,000 a year in expenses from the taxpayer. Foreign Secretary William Hague said, "We have to make sure that is as cost-effective as possible, that it doesn't cost any more to the taxpayer than is absolutely necessary." Tony Blair Associates. Blair established Tony Blair Associates to allow him to provide, in partnership with others, strategic advice on a commercial and pro bono basis, on political and economic trends and governmental reform. The profits from the firm go towards supporting Blair's work on faith, Africa, and climate change. Blair has been subject to criticism for potential conflicts of interest between his diplomatic role as a Middle East envoy, and his work with Tony Blair Associates, and a number of prominent critics have even called for him to be sacked. Blair has used his quartet. Tony Blair Associates works with the Kazakhstan government, advising the regime on judicial, economic, and political reforms, but has been subject to criticism after accusations of whitewashing the image and human rights record of the regime. Blair responded to such criticism by saying his choice to advise the country is an example of how he can nudge controversial figures on a progressive path of reform, and has stated that he receives no personal profit from this advisory role. The Kazakhstan foreign minister said that the country was honored and privileged to be receiving advice from Blair. A letter obtained by the Daily Telegraph in August 2014 revealed Blair had given damage limitation advice to Nursultan Nazarbayev after the December 2011 Zanayazan massacre. Blair was reported to have accepted a business advisory role with President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi of Egypt, a situation deemed incompatible with his role as Middle East envoy. Blair described the report as nonsense. Charity and non-profits. In November 2007 Blair launched the Tony Blair Sports Foundation, which aims to increase childhood participation in sports activities, especially in the northeast of England, where a larger proportion of children are socially excluded, and to promote overall health and prevent childhood obesity. On May 30, 2008, Blair launched the Tony Blair Faith Foundation as a vehicle for encouraging different faiths to join in promoting respect and understanding, as well as working to tackle poverty. Reflecting Blair's own faith but not dedicated to any particular religion, the foundation aims to show how faith is a powerful force for good in the modern world. The foundation will use its profile and resources to encourage people of faith to work together more closely to tackle global poverty and conflict, says its mission statement. In February 2009 he applied to set up a charity called the Tony Blair Africa Governance Initiative. The application was approved in November 2009. In October 2012 Blair's foundation hit controversy when it emerged they were taking on unpaid interns. In December 2016, Blair created the Tony Blair Institute to promote global outlooks by governments and organizations. Memoirs. In March 2010, it was reported that Blair's memoirs, titled The Journey, would be published in September 2010. In July 2010 it was announced the memoirs would be retitled A Journey. The memoirs were seen by many as controversial and a further attempt to profit from his office and from acts related to overseas wars that were widely seen as wrong, leading to anger and suspicion prior to launch. On August 16, 2010 it was announced that Blair would give the £4.6 million advance and all royalties from his memoirs to the Royal British Legion, the charity's largest ever single donation. Media analysis of the sudden announcement was wide-ranging, describing it as an act of desperation to obtain a better launch reception of a humiliating publishing flop that had languished in the ratings, blood money for the lives lost in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, an act with a hidden motive or an expression of guilt, a genius move to address the problem that Tony Blair had one of the most toxic brands around from a PR perspective, and a cynical stunt to wipe the slate, but also as an attempt to make amends. Friends had said that the act was partly motivated by the wish to repair his reputation. The book was published on September 1 and within hours of its launch had become the fastest-selling autobiography of all time. On September 3 Blair gave his first live interview since publication on The Late Late Show in Ireland, with protesters lying in wait there for him. On September 4 Blair was confronted by 200 anti-war and hardline Irish nationalist demonstrators before the first book signing of his memoirs at Eason's bookstore on O'Connell Street in Dublin, with angry activists chanting war criminal and that he had blood on his hands, and clashing with Irish police as they tried to break through a security cordon outside the Eason's store. Blair was pelted with eggs and shoes, and encountered an attempted citizen's arrest for war crimes. Accusations of war crimes. Since the Iraq War, Blair has been the subject of war crimes accusations. Critics of his actions, including Bishop Desmond Tutu, Harold Pinter, and Arundhati Roy, have called for his trial at the International Criminal Court. In November 2011, a War Crimes Tribunal of the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Commission, established by Malaysia's former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, reached a unanimous conclusion that Blair and George W. Bush are guilty of crimes against peace, crimes against humanity, and genocide as a result of their roles in the 2003-2011 Iraq War. The proceedings lasted for 4 days, and consisted of 5 judges of judicial and academic backgrounds, a tribunal-appointed defense team in lieu of the defendants or representatives, and a prosecution team including international law professor Francis Boyle. In September 2012, Desmond Tutu suggested that Blair should follow the path of former African leaders who had been brought before the International Criminal Court in The Hague. The human rights lawyer Jeffrey Bindman concurred with Tutu's suggestion that there should be a war crimes trial. In a statement made in response to Tutu's comments, Blair defended his actions. He was supported by Lord Falconer, who stated that the war had been authorized by United Nations Security Council Resolution 1441. In July 2017, former Iraqi General Abdul Wahid al-Rabat launched a private war crimes prosecution, in the High Court in London, asking for Tony Blair, former Foreign Secretary Jack Straw and former Attorney General Lord Goldsmith to be prosecuted for the crime of aggression for their role in the 2003 invasion of Iraq. The High Court ruled that, although the crime of aggression was recognized in international law, it was not an offence under UK law, and, therefore, the prosecution could not proceed. Political interventions and views. Response to the Iraq inquiry. Iran-West tensions. European Union. American power. Labour Party. Personal life. Family. Blair married Cherie Booth, a Catholic, who would later become a Queen's Counsel, on March 29, 1980. They have 4 children, Ewan, Nicholas, Catherine, and Leo. Leo was the first legitimate child born to a serving Prime Minister in over 150 years since Francis Russell was born to Lord John Russell on July 11, 1849. All 4 children have Irish passports, by virtue of Blair's mother, Hazel Elizabeth Rosaleen Corscadden. The family's primary residence is in Connaught Square, the Blairs own 8 residences in total. His first grandchild was born in October 2016. Wealth. Blair's financial assets are structured in an opaque manner, and as such estimates of their extent vary widely. These include figures of up to £100 million. Blair stated in 2014 that he was worth less than £20 million. A 2015 assertion, by Francis Beckett, David Henke, and Nick Cochin, concluded that Blair had acquired $90 million in a property portfolio worth $37.5 million in the 8 years since he had left office. In October 2021, Blair was named in the Pandora Papers. Religious faith. In 2006, Blair referred to the role of his Christian faith in his decision to go to war in Iraq, stating that he had prayed about the issue, and saying that God would judge him for his decision. I think if you have faith about these things, you realize that judgment is made by other people, and if you believe in God, it's made by God as well. According to Press Secretary Alastair Campbell's diary, Blair often read the Bible before taking any important decisions. He states that Blair had a wobble and considered changing his mind on the eve of the bombing of Iraq in 1998. A longer exploration of his faith can be found in an interview with Third Way magazine. There he says that I was brought up as, but I was not in any real sense a practicing one until I went to Oxford. There was an Australian priest at the same college as me who got me interested again. In a sense, it was a rediscovery of religion as something living, that was about the world around me rather than some sort of special one-to-one relationship with a remote being on high. Suddenly I began to see its social relevance. I began to make sense of the world. At one point Alastair Campbell intervened in an interview, preventing Blair from answering a question about his Christianity, explaining, "We don't do God." Campbell later said that he had intervened only to end the interview because the journalist had been taking an excessive time, and that the comment had just been a throwaway line. Cherie Blair's friend and spiritual guru Carol Kaplan is credited with introducing her and her husband to various New Age symbols and beliefs, including magic pendants known as bioelectric shields. The most controversial of the Blairs' New Age practices occurred when on holiday in Mexico. The couple, wearing only bathing costumes, took part in a rebirthing procedure, which involved smearing mud and fruit over each other's bodies while sitting in a steam bath. Later on, Blair questioned the Pope's attitude towards homosexuality, arguing that religious leaders must start rethinking the issue. Blair was reprimanded by Cardinal Basil Hume in 1996 for receiving Holy Communion at Mass, while still an Anglican, in contravention of canon law. On December 22, 2007, it was disclosed that Blair had joined the Catholic Church. The move was described as a private matter. He had informed Pope Benedict XVI on June 23, 2007 that he wanted to become a Catholic. The Pope and his advisors criticized some of Blair's political actions, but followed up with a reportedly unprecedented red carpet welcome, which included the Cardinal Archbishop of Westminster, Cormac Murphy O'Connor, who would be responsible for Blair's Catholic instruction. In 2010, the tablet named him as one of Britain's most influential Catholics. Extramarital affair allegations. In 2014, Vanity Fair and The Economist published allegations that Blair had had an extramarital affair with Wendy Deng, who was then married to Rupert Murdoch. Blair denied the allegations. Portrayals and cameo appearances. Blair made an animated cameo appearance as himself in The Simpsons episode, The Regina Monologues. He has also appeared as himself at the end of the first episode of The Amazing Mrs. Pritchard, a British television series about an unknown housewife becoming Prime Minister. On March 14, 2007, Blair appeared as a celebrity judge on MasterChef Goes Large after contestants had to prepare a 3-course meal in the Downing Street kitchens for Blair and Bertie Ahern. On March 16, 2007, Blair featured in a comedy sketch with Catherine Tate, who appeared in the guise of her character Lauren Cooper from The Catherine Tate Show. The sketch was made for the BBC Red Nose Day fundraising programme of 2007. During the sketch, Blair used Lauren's catchphrase "Am I Bovaird?" Portrayals. Michael Sheen has portrayed Blair 3 times, in the films The Deal, The Queen, and The Special Relationship. Robert Lindsay portrayed Blair in the TV program A Very Social Secretary, and reprised the role in The Trial of Tony Blair. He was also portrayed by James Larkin in The Government Inspector, and by Ioan Griffith in W. In the 2006 Channel 4 comedy-drama documentary, Tony Blair, Rock Star, he was portrayed by Christian Brassington. Blair in fiction and satire. When Blair resigned as Prime Minister, Robert Harris, a former Fleet Street political editor, dropped his other work to write The Ghost. The CIA-influenced British Prime Minister in the book is said to be a thinly disguised version of Blair. The novel was filmed as The Ghost Writer with Pierce Brosnan portraying the Blair character. Adam Lang. Stephen Mangan portrays Blair in The Hunt for Tony Blair, a one-off The Comic Strip Presents, satire presented in the style of a 1950s film noir. In the film, he is wrongly implicated in the deaths of Robin Cook and John Smith and on the run from Inspector Hutton. In 2007, the scenario of a possible war crimes trial for the former British Prime Minister was satirised by the British broadcaster Channel 4, in a mockumentary, The Trial of Tony Blair, which concluded with the fictional Blair being dispatched to The Hague. Honours. Privy Councillor. Congressional Gold Medal. Honorary Doctor of Law from Queen's University Belfast. Presidential Medal of Freedom. Dan David Prize. Liberty Medal. Order of Freedom. Knight Companion of the Order of the Garter. In May 2007, Blair was invested as a paramount chief by the chiefs and people of the village of Mahira in Sierra Leone. The honor was bestowed upon him in recognition of the role played by his government in the Sierra Leone Civil War. On May 22, 2008, Blair received an honorary law doctorate from Queen's University Belfast, alongside Bertie Ahern, for distinction in public service and roles in the Northern Ireland peace process. On January 13, 2009, Blair was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President George W. Bush. Bush stated that Blair was given the award in recognition of exemplary achievement and to convey the utmost esteem of the American people, and cited Blair's support for the War on Terror and his role in achieving peace in Northern Ireland as 2 reasons for justifying his being presented with the award. On February 16, 2009, Blair was awarded the Dan David Prize by Tel Aviv University for exceptional leadership and steadfast determination in helping to engineer agreements and forge lasting solutions to areas in conflict. He was awarded the prize in May 2009. On July 8, 2010, Blair was awarded the Order of Freedom by President Fatmir Secdiu of Kosovo. As Blair is considered to have been instrumental in ending the conflict in Kosovo, some boys born in the country following the war have been given the name Tony or Tony Blair. On September 13, 2010, Blair was awarded the Liberty Medal at the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It was presented by former President Bill Clinton, and is awarded annually to men and women of courage and conviction who strive to secure the blessings of liberty to people around the globe. On December 31, 2021, it was announced that the Queen had appointed Blair a Knight Companion of the Order of the Garter. Blair had reportedly indicated when he left office that he did not want the traditional knighthood or peerage bestowed on former prime ministers. A petition cited his role in the Iraq War as a reason to remove the knighthood and garnered more than 1 million signatures. He received his Garter insignia on June 10, 2022 from the Queen during an audience at Windsor Castle. As a former Prime Minister, Blair, with Cherie, had a place of honour at the state funeral of Queen Elizabeth II on September 19, 2022. Works. Blair, Tony. A Journey. London, Random House. ISBN 0-09-192555X-OCLC657172683. Blair, Tony. The Courage of Our Convictions. London, Fabian Society. ISBN 0-7163-0603-4. Blair, Tony. Superpower, Not Superstate. London, Federal Trust for Education and Research. ISBN 1-903403-25-1. Blair, Tony. The Third Way, New Politics for the New Century. London, Fabian Society. ISBN 0-7163-0588-7. Blair, Tony. Leading the Way, New Vision for Local Government. London, Institute for Public Policy Research. ISBN 1-86030-075-8. Blair, Tony. New Britain, My Vision of a Young Country. New York, Basic Books. ISBN 0-81333338-5. Blair, Tony. Let Us Face the Future. London, Fabian Society. ISBN 0-7163-0571-2. Blair, Tony. What Price a Safe Society? London, Fabian Society. ISBN 0-7163-0562-3. Blair, Tony. Socialism. London, Fabian Society. ISBN 0-7163-0565-8. See also: Blacherism. Bush-Blair 2003 Iraq Memo. Cash for Honors Scandal. Cultural depictions of Tony Blair. Parliamentary motion to impeach Tony Blair. Halsbury's Laws of England, reference to impeachment in volume on Constitutional Law and Human Rights, paragraph 416.